The man on the corner. The morning air was cold in downtown Los Angeles. Cars rushed by, horns blaring, people walking with coffee cups in hand, headphones on, eyes down. The world moved fast, and no one stopped, not for the man sitting quietly on the corner of 4th and Main. He was wrapped in a gray, ragged hoodie. His head was bowed. His hands were weathered, his fingers trembling slightly from the cold. A cardboard sign rested beside him. It read, "I'm just trying to get home. Thank you for your kindness." Most walked past. Some glanced and looked away. Others smirked or whispered. But he didn't beg. He didn't shout. He just sat there with quiet dignity like he was waiting for something, or someone. On that same street, a sleek black car pulled up to the valet at a glass-covered high-rise. Out stepped Preston Vale, a billionaire tech mogul known more for his flashy lifestyle than for his compassion. He wore a tailored coat, designer sunglasses, and a smirk that rarely left his face. He was on his way to a business event on the 30th floor of the tower. As he walked past the man on the corner, he chuckled, shaking his head. "Get a job, man," he muttered loud enough for others to hear. A few laughed with him, nervously, unsure if they should. The man in the hoodie didn't look up. He didn't flinch. But something in his stillness said he heard it all. Inside the building, cameras flashed. People clapped as Preston made his entrance. Reporters asked about his latest venture, a luxury space tourism company. Preston soaked in the attention, throwing around big words and bigger numbers. Meanwhile, outside, the man in the hoodie still sat. A little girl passing by tugged at her mother's hand. "Mommy, why's he sitting there all alone?" Her mother looked uneasy. "Don't stare, honey, let's go." But the girl broke free and walked up to him, kneeling beside him. She pulled out a small red apple from her backpack and placed it gently in his hand. The man looked at her. He raised his head slowly. For a brief moment, his eyes met hers. They were kind eyes. Deep and sad, but full of something else too. Wisdom. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice soft. Her mother rushed forward and pulled her back, apologizing, but the man just smiled and nodded. Across the street, an old man watched the whole thing unfold. He sat on a bench, feeding pigeons. He leaned toward a man sitting next to him and said quietly, "That ain't just any man in that hoodie." The other man raised a brow. "What do you mean?" The old man chuckled. "Just wait. The city's gonna learn today." Hours passed. The sun dipped lower. Crowds came and went. Then something happened. A man in a wheelchair rolled up. He had once worked in the film industry, but a car crash had left him paralyzed and forgotten. He recognized the man in the hoodie. His eyes widened. "Is that... No way." He wheeled closer. "Keanu?" The man in the hoodie slowly turned his head. The other man blinked. "Keanu Reeves? Is that you?" The man in the hoodie smiled gently. "Not so loud," he said. "Some people see only what they want to see." "Why are you here, man? You're rich? You're famous. What's going on?" Keanu looked at the ground. His fingers clutched the apple the little girl had given him. "I'm looking for something," he said. "Something I lost a long time ago." Before the man could ask more, footsteps echoed nearby. Preston was exiting the building again, surrounded by cameras and assistants. His eyes locked on the small crowd that had gathered. He noticed the man in the wheelchair. Then he saw the hoodie, and he laughed again. "You're still here?" he said, stepping closer. "Listen, buddy, if you're expecting a handout, go cry somewhere else. You don't belong on my sidewalk." The crowd went silent. Some pulled out phones. Preston pointed a finger. "This is the problem with society. We reward laziness and weakness. I built everything I have from scratch. No one gave me anything." Keanu stood slowly. His posture changed. He looked taller, stronger. His hands lowered the hood slowly. Gasps filled the air. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "That's Keanu Reeves." Preston's smile vanished. Keanu looked at him with calm, steady eyes. "You built it all, huh?" he said softly. "Tell me, did you build your heart too? Or did you sell that for stock options?" Preston blinked. Do you even know how many people you step over each day? Keanu asked. You laugh at those who struggle, but have you ever listened to their story? I don't have time for sob stories, Preston said, adjusting his jacket. Keanu nodded. You're right, stories take time. Kindness takes time, and maybe, just maybe, that's the one thing you never earned. The crowd was silent. Keanu turned to the man in the wheelchair. Help me up, he asked. The man smiled and reached out. Keanu steadied himself and stood tall. The cameras were rolling now. Preston's assistant whispered to him, Sir, you might want to go. This is already on social media. Preston scowled and walked off quickly, pushing past people. Keanu looked at the others. I wasn't pretending to be homeless, he said. But I needed to see something. I needed to see if people still cared when they didn't know someone was watching. The man in the wheelchair chuckled. And what did you find? Keanu looked down at the apple in his hand. Hope, he said quietly. And maybe the start of something good. And just like that, he placed the apple gently back on the sidewalk and walked away, his figure disappearing into the crowd. But this was only the beginning, because what Keanu was about to do next would change the lives of thousands, and maybe even one arrogant billionaire too. The truth behind the hood, the video of Keanu Reeves revealing himself on the street corner, spread like wildfire across social media. By the time the sun set, it had already gathered over 10 million views. People from all over the world were watching, commenting, sharing. Some were shocked, others were inspired. And many were asking the same question. Why was one of Hollywood's most beloved actors sitting on a street corner disguised as a homeless man? In a quiet apartment just outside the city, Keanu sat alone, on the floor. The lights were dim. His old motorcycle helmet rested on the shelf beside a row of faded Polaroids. There were no awards displayed, no pictures of red carpets, just memories. Silent, personal, untouched by the spotlight. His phone buzzed endlessly. Managers, agents, reporters, friends, all trying to reach him. He ignored them. His mind wasn't on fame. It hadn't been for a long time. Keanu stared at the apple still resting on the kitchen counter. He hadn't eaten it. It meant more than food. It was the only gift that day that came without expectation, without cameras, without judgment. Just a simple act of kindness from a little girl who saw him not as a stranger or a star, but as a person. And that reminded him of something. Years ago, before the fame, before the movie sets, Keanu had once lived in his car. He didn't tell many people. He had scraped together meals, done odd jobs, and slept under stars, not because it was romantic, but because there was nowhere else to go. He knew how it felt to be invisible, how the world kept walking no matter how broken you were. That memory stayed with him, and it was exactly why he had done what he did. He hadn't been playing a role. He was searching, trying to understand if the world still held space for compassion in its heart. He had seen people walk by him like he didn't exist. He had also seen a little girl kneel and offer him an apple with her tiny hands. One moment of love had outweighed 100 moments of ignorance. But the moment outside the tower with Preston Vale, it stuck with him. The arrogance, the laughter, the dismissiveness, not because it hurt him, but because it echoed something much bigger. Preston Vale wasn't just a billionaire, he was a symbol of a system, of a mindset that had infected many powerful people. The belief that success was a wall that separated them from everyone else. And Keanu had seen it too often. Celebrities in limos avoiding eye contact with their drivers, producers yelling at waiters, executives mocking janitors. But no more. Keanu made a decision. He walked over to his desk and opened a worn leather notebook. Inside were plans, handwritten sketches of an idea he had been shaping for years. Not a film, not a show, something real, something that could make a difference. He titled the page, Project Humility. It was simple. He would take the world's most powerful, richest, and most influential people and place them in the shoes of those they ignored. But not for a show, not for entertainment. It would be immersive, honest, private, and if they came out changed, then maybe the world could shift too. His first target? Preston Vale. Keanu knew it wouldn't be easy. The man had an ego taller than the buildings he owned. But that didn't matter. Sometimes the hardest people to reach were the ones who needed truth the most. Meanwhile, the internet exploded with debate. Some called Keanu a saint. Others thought it was a stunt. News anchors discussed it on television. Psychologists debated it on panels, and fans created tribute videos with soft piano music in the background. But behind all the noise, something quieter was happening. People were changing. A group of college students started handing out free sandwiches to the homeless. An elderly woman left blankets in the park with handwritten notes. A high school teacher played Keanu's video for her class and asked them, "What do you see when you look at a stranger?" Small ripples. Real ones. Back in his high-rise office, Preston Vale was furious. He paced back and forth yelling at his assistant, "Why didn't someone tell me who he was? I look like a complete idiot." His assistant stayed silent. Preston turned to his giant window. The city stretched out below, glowing with lights. But for once, it felt like he was standing above a world he didn't understand. He opened his laptop and clicked on the video. Again. There he was, laughing at a man he thought was beneath him. And then the hood came off. And the crowd changed. And he changed, at least in their eyes. But what bothered him more than the embarrassment was the silence in Keanu's eyes. Calm, steady, knowing. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. That look haunted him. The next day, as Preston stepped into his private elevator, a small envelope was taped to the back wall. He paused, frowned, opened it. Inside was a single note. "Sometimes the mirror you need doesn't hang on a wall, it sits on a sidewalk." No signature. No return address. He looked around, suspicious. Cameras? Prank? But something about the handwriting was familiar. Something gentle, slow, intentional. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, Preston felt unsure. He carried the note in his pocket all day. He didn't tell anyone. That night he drove to the same corner where he had seen the man in the hoodie. He parked the car, stepped out, and stood quietly. The sidewalk was empty. Just a single apple on the ground, and, on the apple, a tiny folded paper tucked beneath the stem. He picked it up. "When you're ready to listen, I'll be waiting." Preston stared at it. The street felt different now. Quieter. Heavier. He sat on the cold concrete and waited. Cars passed. No one noticed him, and for the first time, he felt what it was like to be unseen. He didn't know it yet, but his world was about to be turned upside down. KeanuReeves had just begun. The first fall, the streetlights cast long shadows as Preston Vale remained seated on the cold pavement. For years, he had walked by people just like this, never once considering what it felt like to sit below the gaze of the world, invisible to those who stepped over his silence. But now, in this rare moment of stillness, surrounded by city noise that never paused, he was no longer Preston the billionaire. He was just a man with questions he couldn't answer. The note in his pocket felt heavier than it should. "When you're ready to listen, I'll be waiting." Who writes something like that? Who has the patience to wait for someone like him? He didn't know how long he sat there before a gentle voice broke through the noise. "Didn't expect to see you back here." Preston turned his head. Keanu stood a few feet away. No cameras, no security. Just a plain dark hoodie and jeans. He looked like anyone else, but his presence carried weight, like someone who had lived too many lives in silence. Preston stood slowly, brushing the dust off his coat. I don't know what I'm doing here," he said honestly. Keanu nodded. "Most people don't. Not at first." "Was it some kind of setup?" Preston asked. "Was this a lesson, some Hollywood experiment?" Keanu gave a soft laugh, shaking his head. "This wasn't for the world," he said. "This was for you." Preston didn't speak. He just looked at Keanu. Really looked this time. Not the actor, Not the symbol, just the man. Keanu gestured toward a bench nearby. Walk with me. They sat down, the city moving around them, indifferent. You have everything, Preston, Keanu said after a long pause. But have you ever truly seen people? Preston frowned. Of course, I run companies, I work with people every day. No, Keanu said gently. You use people. There's a difference. That sentence pierced through the surface. Preston clenched his jaw but didn't argue. Deep down, something in him recognized the truth. What do you want from me? He asked. Keanu looked up at the stars barely visible above the city glow. Not what I want. It's what you've lost. Preston didn't reply. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside, this is an address. Go there tomorrow, alone. Stay 24 hours. No phones, no assistants, no name tags. Preston took the envelope, hesitated. Why should I trust you? Keanu's voice was calm. Because deep down, you want to change. And no one else has ever cared enough to challenge you. Preston looked down at the envelope. Keanu stood. If you don't show up, I won't reach out again. And then he disappeared into the night as quietly as he came. The next morning, Preston stared at the address on the paper. It was handwritten, in neat, humble script. Rosewood Community Shelter, 1187 Garland Street. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to toss it aside, move on, forget the strange encounter. But another part, smaller, quieter, knew that if he didn't go, something inside him would stay broken. So he left his mansion. No chauffeur, no fancy suit, just a plain t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. For the first time in years, he took the subway. People barely glanced at him. No one recognized him. He felt like a ghost, and oddly, it was a relief. When he reached Rosewood Shelter, he found a modest building tucked between abandoned warehouses. Peeling paint, a crooked sign, and a line of people waiting outside. A woman at the entrance greeted him with a clipboard. Are you here to volunteer or check in? Preston blinked. Check in. She smiled warmly. Welcome. Name? He paused, then said, Just call me Jack. She handed him a key. Room 12. Dinner's at 5, no outside calls, no media, just rest and community. We keep it simple here. Room 12 was a narrow space with a bunk bed, faded walls, and a small desk. No view, no luxury. But something about it felt real. As he settled in, he heard laughter from the hallway. Real laughter, not the forced kind from boardrooms or scripted interviews. It echoed with struggle, but also with survival. He stepped into the common room. There were about 20 people. Young, old, black, white, veteran, immigrant, mother, addict, artist. All broken in different ways, yet all here. Together. One man, missing teeth, waved at him. Yo, new guy. Sit down. Tell us your story. Preston froze. Story? He sat awkwardly. I don't have one, he muttered. A woman with a baby on her lap smiled. Everyone's got a story, even the ones pretending not to. Preston looked around. Every face was open, listening. No one judged him. No one laughed. He found himself speaking, not about stocks, not about deals, but about growing up alone. About trying to impress a father who never smiled. About chasing money so hard he forgot why he started. About losing a brother to addiction. About silence and shame and loneliness that no mansion ever cured. He didn't even realize his eyes had welled up until the baby reached out and touched his hand. The room was quiet. Then the woman whispered, Now that's a real man. That night, Preston lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. He hadn't felt this human in years. He heard footsteps outside. Then a soft knock. He opened the door. Keanu stood there. How was it? He asked. Preston didn't answer. He just looked at him and whispered, I think I forgot what it felt like to be seen. Keanu nodded. Good, he said. Now let's do something with it. The next chapter had begun, but the world wasn't ready for what came next. Because Keanu and Preston were about to shake the foundations of the city, and it would all begin with one powerful question. What if kindness had a headquarters? Headquarters of Hope. It was an ordinary Thursday morning when the city of Los Angeles woke up to something extraordinary. Giant billboards across town suddenly went black, then lit up with the same image. 3 simple words written in white, on a gray background: kindness is coming. No company logo, no celebrity face, no brand. Just a whisper across the skyline. People were confused, curious, and for a brief moment, intrigued. But behind this quiet campaign was a storm brewing in silence. Inside a repurposed warehouse near the edge of downtown, construction crews worked night and day. Painters covered graffiti with warm colors, electricians rewired broken outlets, and volunteers swept out decades of dust and despair. The building was changing. It had no name yet, but it already had a purpose. Preston stood in the middle of it all, wearing a dusty t-shirt and jeans, holding a broom. Sweat trickled down his forehead, and his expensive watch had long been replaced by a rubber wristband that simply read, "Serve before self." Keanu watched him from a distance, leaning against a beam, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. "You're really doing it," Keanu said. Preston nodded. "I don't even know why it took me so long to start." "Because you were living on top of a mountain," Keanu replied. "Now you've come down where the people are." They called it the refuge. But it was more than a shelter. It was more than a community center. It was a place where broken people could come and not be fixed, but be heard, be respected, be remembered. Keanu had one rule: no one wears a name tag. Because names carried titles and titles carried walls. On opening day, over 200 people showed up. Some came for food, some for a bed, others for nothing but a little peace. And yet, the atmosphere was different than any place they had been before. The walls were filled with paintings made by children, survivors, and people in recovery. One corner held shelves of books, all donated by strangers who wrote messages inside the covers. "You are not forgotten. Your story matters. You made it here. That means something." And in the middle of it all was a long wooden table, handcrafted by veterans, where anyone could sit. No reservation, no price. Just presence. Preston sat at that table beside an old man with burn scars on his hands. "Used to be a chef," the man said, showing a photo of a restaurant once full of life. "Fire took everything. Didn't think I'd ever hold a spoon again." Preston passed him a ladle. "Then maybe you'll teach me." In the kitchen, Keanu was chopping vegetables alongside a teenager with a teardrop tattoo. They weren't talking about pasts. They were talking about recipes. The boy smiled for the first time in weeks. Journalists tried to gain entry. They were denied. "This place isn't for headlines," Keanu told them. "It's for healing." Still, the word spread. Not through press releases, but through stories. A man who hadn't seen his daughter in 10 years reunited with her after a volunteer helped him find her online. A woman who escaped domestic violence found a bed, then found the courage to start her own self-defense class for other women. A veteran with no legs built birdhouses in the courtyard, and soon, every child who visited left with one. Preston watched all this unfold with silent awe. This wasn't about redemption anymore. This was revolution. One evening, as the sky turned orange and streetlights began to glow, Preston and Keanu sat on the roof of the refuge. Below, the sound of soft music and laughter floated upward. Kids played tag near the mural wall. An elderly couple danced slowly on the sidewalk. "Do you ever miss it?" Preston asked. "The fame, the attention, the big lights." Keanu shook his head. "That was a season. This is soul." Preston took a breath. "I used to think I needed more. More money, more property, more deals. But now, I feel full." "Because you stopped collecting things," Keanu said, "and started collecting people." They both looked out over the city. Far in the distance, lights blinked from a high tower, Preston's old office. The building still stood tall, but it looked lonely now. Cold. "Do you think others will follow?" Preston asked. "Only if they believe kindness is still powerful," Keanu answered. And right now you're giving them a reason to believe. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Preston received a call, not from a banker or a shareholder, but from someone he hadn't heard from in over a decade, his younger sister. "I saw what you're doing," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think I'd ever say this again, but I'm proud of you." He sat there, the phone pressed against his ear, unable to speak. After the call, he went downstairs, found Keanu wiping down the kitchen counter and said, "You were right. I didn't lose everything. I just didn't know where to look." Keanu smiled. Sometimes the lowest place reveals the highest truth. And that's when Preston had an idea. Something even bigger. What if the refuge wasn't just one place? He asked. What if it was the beginning of a movement? Keanu raised an eyebrow. A network, Preston explained. Across every city. Each one run by locals, funded by people who want to serve, not shine. No investors, no profits. Just purpose. Keanu nodded slowly. And you think people would support that? Not all people, Preston said. But the right ones. They spent the next month building the plan. They called it Project Ember. Each ember was a refuge. A spark. Something small that could light up a whole neighborhood. The first ember opened in Oakland, then in Detroit, then in Phoenix. Word spread, quietly, respectfully, and wherever it went, stories followed. Not dramatic ones, not viral videos, just real lives touched in real ways. Preston spoke at a community meeting in Cleveland. He didn't use a microphone. He wore no suit. He stood in a school gymnasium with a chalkboard behind him and said, "I used to think I was powerful. Then I got laughed at by a little girl who offered me an apple without asking for anything back. And now, I'm finally learning what power really looks like." The room was silent. Then they clapped. Not because he was a billionaire, but because he had become a believer. But somewhere in the shadows, not everyone was celebrating. The corporate world had noticed, and they were not pleased. Because Preston wasn't just changing minds, he was threatening markets. And soon someone from his past would come knocking. Someone who saw kindness not as hope, but as weakness. And this time, the challenge wouldn't come from a sidewalk. It would come from a boardroom, and everything they built would be put to the test. When giants wake, the sky over Los Angeles darkened, with an approaching storm, but it wasn't just weather. Something colder was moving beneath the surface. Something built of fear, pride, and money. Deep within polished boardrooms and glass towers, whispers turned to warnings. Memos were written, in secret, deals discussed behind closed doors, and at the center of those conversations was one name, once hailed for profits and power, now painted as a traitor to his class. Preston Vale. He had become more than a billionaire. He had become an idea. And ideas are dangerous when they threaten comfort. His company, Vale Technologies, had been left under the control of his executive board while he stepped away to focus on Project Ember. They had assumed it would be a phase, a short-lived guilt trip. But weeks passed, then months, and still Preston didn't return to the tower. He didn't host gala dinners, didn't take calls from investors. Instead, he was seen serving food in Cleveland, painting a mural in Chicago, planting trees in Detroit. And worst of all, he was being loved for it. Media outlets, despite the initial ban, began leaking stories, not just about Keanu and the refuge, but about the ripple effect. Donations surged, volunteers doubled. Business leaders across the country began asking if they should follow. What if kindness had margins? What if compassion was profitable in more ways than one? But where some saw hope, others saw war. At the top floor of Vale Technologies, the interim CEO, Gordon Lewis, stood beside a mahogany conference table. He was tall, silver-haired, and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "He's ruining everything," Gordon said, staring out the window. A younger executive spoke nervously. "Sir, but public opinion is on his side. Even the media is calling it a revolution in human capital." "Nonsense," Gordon cut in. "This isn't charity. This is weakness disguised as virtue. If the world follows him, we lose control. He turned to the room. Gentlemen, we need to bring Preston back, and if he won't come willingly, we will force him. The plan was swift. Calculated. First, they froze his assets. Legally, they argued he had abandoned his role and misused corporate funds to build unapproved projects. Second, they launched a campaign, using shadow money to fund influencers and podcasters to question Keanu's motives. Is he building a cult? Is the refuge just a vanity project for broken celebrities? Third, they sent legal letters to every Ember Center, threatening shutdowns unless the properties were returned to corporate ownership. And then, they sent the final message. A letter delivered by hand to Keanu and Preston as they stood outside a newly opened refuge in Kansas City. The letter read, "Your time is up. Return control or be erased. You have 72 hours. Preston sat on the bench outside that evening, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. He hadn't touched a stock document in 6 months, hadn't worn a suit or spoken to his old board, and now they wanted him back not to reclaim leadership but to bury what he had become. Keanu sat beside him, silent. "I knew this would happen," Preston whispered. "I just didn't expect it to sting." Keanu looked at him. "Because part of you still believed they'd understand. They were my friends once, my partners. They built with me. And now they tear down because they're afraid of something they never learned to build. Empathy." Preston leaned forward, elbows on knees. "What do we do?" Keanu smiled slightly. "We stand, not in anger, not in hate, but in truth." The next day, Preston held a press conference outside the refuge. No podium, no stage, just a circle of folding chairs and people from every Ember Center. He stood with Keanu behind him and spoke quietly into a handheld mic. "They say I abandoned business. They say I've turned my back on profit. But let me ask, what good is profit if people are starving for dignity? What good is success if it isolates you from humanity?" He paused. "This isn't about me, or Keanu. This is about remembering what matters. You cannot sue compassion. You cannot freeze purpose." He looked into the cameras. "And you cannot silence kindness." The clip went viral in minutes. Millions watched, millions felt it, and some of the very investors who had sided with the board began calling in. A retired CEO of a major bank posted, "I once fired a man for being too soft. Watching this, I think I fired the wrong version of myself." Still, the fight was far from over. That night, someone set fire to the refuge in Kansas City. No lives were lost, but the building was gutted. Preston stood in front of the ruins. The next morning, covered in soot, holding a photo album that had somehow survived the blaze. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He looked into the ashes and whispered, "They think this will stop us." Keanu appeared beside him, smoke still lingering in the air. "What now?" Preston asked. Keanu picked up a piece of charred wood and balanced it on a beam. "We rebuild, again and again, until they realize we're not just a shelter. We're a seed." Preston looked at the crowd gathering. Volunteers, families, neighbors, even city workers. No one had told them to come. They came because they believed. And right, then Preston knew something deeper than faith. He knew legacy, not the kind carved in marble or measured in net worth, but the kind that lives in kitchens, in notebooks, in the hearts of people who once gave up but found the courage to rise again. He took a breath. "Tell the board," he said, turning to one of his assistants. "I won't return, not now, not ever. The real board I answer to is standing right here." A week later, Vale Technologies held a crisis meeting. Stock prices dropped, internal leaks surfaced, investors demanded reform. And as the chaos brewed, a letter arrived at the office of Gordon Lewis. It read, "You built towers, but we built trust. Let's see which one lasts longer in the wind." No signature, just a single fingerprint in soot. The world was watching. A movement had become a mission, and in the final chapter, Keanu and Preston would make their most daring move yet. to bring kindness into the one place it had never been allowed to breathe, a courtroom. The trial of kindness, the courtroom was packed. Not with journalists, not with celebrities, not even with curious members of the public, but with people, real people, men and women who had once been forgotten, silenced, walked past on the streets. Now they sat upright in clean shirts and thrift store suits. Their eyes were filled with stories. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there because this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a moment in history. The case was simple on the surface. Vale Technologies versus Preston Vale. The charge: unauthorized use of company resources, abandonment of executive duties, and actions that damaged shareholder value. But underneath the legal words, everyone knew the truth. This trial wasn't about money. It was about the soul of a man, the soul of a movement. Keanu Reeves sat silently in the second row, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. Beside him, volunteers from across the country sat shoulder to shoulder. Teachers, single mothers, veterans, students, recovering addicts. The court had never seen a witness list like this. Preston stood at the defendant's table. No lawyer. He had chosen to represent himself. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and quiet eyes, raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Vale, are you sure you wish to proceed without counsel?" Preston nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe this is something I must say myself." The courtroom settled. Gordon Lewis, flanked by a team of corporate attorneys, smirked from the other table. He whispered to his lead counsel, "This is going to be easier than we thought." The prosecution opened with numbers, charts, spreadsheets. They painted Preston as reckless, unfit, and emotionally unstable. They said he had gone rogue, jeopardizing shareholder interests in favor of personal whims. He built centers using unapproved funds, one lawyer barked. He gave away assets meant for profit, and he aligned our brand with unpredictable individuals like Mr. Reeves. Gordon leaned forward, pretending to be concerned. "We do not oppose charity," he said, with a well-rehearsed frown. "But this is not charity. It's chaos. We are not a foundation. We are a corporation." Preston stood when his turn came. No notes, no prepared remarks, just his voice. "I used to believe what they believe," he began. "I used to think success meant control, that numbers on a screen made me powerful, that the more I gained, the more I mattered." He paused. "But one day I laughed at a man on a sidewalk, a man I thought was beneath me. I said, 'Get a job.' I thought I was clever." His eyes flicked to Keanu. "And then that man took off his hood, and everything I believed came crashing down." The courtroom listened, really listened. "I walked away from millions, yes, but not because I lost my mind. I walked away because I found something else, something stronger than money. I found people who taught me how to serve without asking for anything. I found a man who had everything but still chose to sit on cold cement just to remember what it meant to feel." He gestured to the crowd. "You call it chaos. I call it compassion." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Vale, do you have evidence to support your claim that the assets were used appropriately?" "Yes, Your Honor," Preston said. "But more than that, I have lives." He turned. A young woman rose from the gallery. "My name is Amira," she said. "Before I found the refuge, I was sleeping in a stairwell with my daughter. I applied for jobs but couldn't wash my clothes. No one hired me. Then I met Mr. Vale. He gave me nothing, except dignity. Today I work at a bank. I brought my daughter to school this morning. A veteran followed her. I was drunk for 7 years. My family gave up on me. Then someone at Ember showed up at the corner where I slept. Not with judgment, with food. I've been sober a year. I teach woodworking now." One by one they rose. A boy who lost his parents. An elderly man who lost his home. A refugee mother. A former gang member turned youth mentor. They didn't cry. They didn't plead. They told their truth. And the courtroom was silent. For the first time in a long time, silence wasn't empty. It was full. When they sat down, the judge asked Gordon's attorneys if they wished to cross-examine. They whispered amongst themselves, caught off guard. "No, Your Honor," the lead counsel said. "No questions." Gordon's face hardened. He knew it was slipping away. Preston approached the final part of his defense. "You say I broke rules," he said. "I did. I broke the rule that says money is more important than mercy. I broke the rule that says leadership means standing above. I chose to kneel." He looked at the judge. "And if that's a crime, then yes, I'm guilty." The judge studied him, then asked, "What would you like this court to decide?" Preston's voice softened. "Not for me, for them." He turned again to the crowd. "Let the people own what we built. Not the company. Not me. Let the Ember Centers become cooperatives, each one run by its people, not for profit, for purpose." The judge sat back. She didn't speak for a long time. And then, she smiled. "This court finds that Mr. Vale acted not out of negligence, but necessity. And we agree. Purpose must never be punished." Gavel down. Case dismissed. And for the first time since it all began, the courtroom broke into applause. Outside the courthouse, the street filled with people. Not protesters, not fans, citizens, volunteers, believers. A little girl handed Keanu a new apple. He knelt beside her. "You were the beginning," he said. "Did you know that?" She shook her head, smiling. "You reminded me," he said softly, "that kindness can start with something small." Preston joined him. Reporters surrounded them. One shouted, "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Vale." "What's next?" Keanu looked around, people laughing, hugging, strangers helping strangers. He turned to Preston and said, "What's next?" Preston grinned. "We keep going." Keanu nodded. "We light more embers, and somewhere, in a far corner of the city, a new building rose, simple, unmarked. But inside it, someone whispered a prayer of thanks. Because once, a man laughed at someone he didn't understand. And now, the world was learning how to listen again.